Kaci Sullivan from Missouri gave birth 5 years ago and then began to transition to become a man. Last month, he gave birth again. Kaci conceived with partner Stephen after a break from taking male hormones. He underwent a C-section following 7 days in labour before welcoming Phoenix, who weighs a healthy 8 pounds 9 ounces. Here are a couple of videos he did during his pregnancy.
I'm 32 weeks, a little bit more than 32 weeks now. So 7 months, getting pretty big for sure. Hello everyone, I am now 8 months pregnant. A little bit more than 37 weeks. Sorry that my bed looks like a bomb exploded on it in the background. I've just been studying all day. I finally had a cesarean section at about 2 p.m. yesterday, so baby is not quite 24 hours old yet.
Kaci, thank you so much for talking to us, and congratulations. I gather you got married yesterday.
I did, yes.
Wow, how is that?
I'm sorry, what was that?
How did that happen?
Well, we got married before a judge. We had had a social ceremony in the summer before, like, our friends and our family, and then it was just something that we still needed to take care of. So it was nice. It was before a judge. It was in the Capitol. Madison has an absolutely gorgeous Capitol building, and it was nice. We had a few witnesses, and it was really beautiful.
It's clearly the middle of the night there, or sort of 2 o'clock in the morning. So Phoenix, at 5.5 weeks old, is sleeping soundly. How is Phoenix doing?
They're doing fantastic. They're a really happy baby. They're gaining weight. They have great focus. They make eye contact. They reach their arms out to be held. They're cuddly. They're just great. They're everything you would hope a baby would be.
And tell us about the birth, because I understand you were in labour for 7 days before having a C-section.
Yeah, it was a lot of prodromal labour, for sure. My midwife said that she knew somebody who went for 2 weeks, though, so I guess it could have been even worse. And I did end up opting for a C-section. I just was ready for it to be done. So the labor was intense for sure, but the birth was beautiful, even though it was a C-section and it was unexpected. I mean, it's always scary to go under the knife. It wasn't my first C-section. My first child was a cesarean as well, so it's not like I'd never done it before. It was different, though, because when I had my first child, I wasn't able to see anything, so I felt pretty disconnected from the birth experience. But with this C-section, there was a little monitor that I was able to actually see the baby being taken out. So it was lovely to be able to see them and see their little mouth open as I heard the scream. It made it very real for me. It was a beautiful experience, and they bring the baby over to you. And while I was laying there, I was still able to get to see my husband looking at the baby and the baby looking at my husband. And it was just lovely. It was like the baby knows that that was their dad. It was just a gorgeous moment, and I really couldn't ask for more.
Well, many congratulations on the birth of Phoenix. You have been taking the male hormone testosterone to help transition from a woman to a man, but you took a break from that and your periods began again, which is when you conceived with your partner, Stephen.
Right. Exactly.
And how did you react when you realised you were pregnant this time?
I was so happy. I was relieved. We'd only been trying for 6 months, which in the grand scheme of things isn't really very long at all. But it was still long enough for me to be completely worried that it wasn't going to happen, that, we weren't going to be able to. And, there's not a lot of information out there, so there wasn't a whole lot to go out and reassure myself with or say, well, this is how it went for this person, or this is something that I could do to increase my chances. So it feels very much like walking blind and taking shots in the dark, which is why it's so important to me to create this content, right, so that it's there for other people. So I was overjoyed when we finally had a positive pregnancy test. It was actually the 3rd one we'd had in a row. It's just about, and a lot of times that's common, right? Call that a chemical pregnancy when you get, when you have a positive pregnancy test, but it doesn't stick. So I was really grateful. I think you're always grateful when you're trying and it happens.
And as the pregnancy progressed, what response did you get from people when they saw you, a man, with a pregnancy bump?
People don't really assume that. They don't, if it's a stranger, I didn't have a single instance where somebody put 2 and 2 together and realized that's what it was. Or if they did, they certainly didn't communicate that to me or address me with that in any way. But people certainly were intrigued by it, especially as it got near the end of it. People noticed the shape for sure, and people stared and looked at each other. I sometimes see people like commenting like, "What is up with that?" But nobody ever addressed me, and I don't think that anybody probably made that assumption. Maybe some people did, but I think for the most part, people just thought that it was weird and wondered why I looked like that.
Were you ever anxious about going out?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like for the last trimester, I didn't even really want to leave the house, and for the last 4 weeks, it was like pulling teeth to get me to go out in public at all because I just didn't. I couldn't. It made me too anxious. I didn't want to deal with it.
What made you anxious? What were you worried about?
Oh, just the attention from people, you know. Just I didn't because it literally like I could not go anywhere without people looking, which makes sense. I was hugely pregnant, but I just didn't. I'm kind of a high anxiety person, and I don't. It's just I don't even just walking around the grocery store, going and doing anything when you can't do that without people noticing and looking, and sometimes it's just more preferable to stay at home.
You will know that online there have been some derogatory comments towards you.
Sure.
I've read some say that it's unnatural, that it's a sick joke, that you're doing it for money. How do you react to those? How do you respond to those kind of comments?
Well, I just laugh at them. I don't even bother reading them. And you'll find that you can be anyone doing anything, and there's going to be a subset of the populace that takes issue with you doing it. And the more controversial what you're doing is, the more that can be expected. But I don't know. It just doesn't really bother me. I don't particularly care. That's their problem. It's a personal issue. It doesn't affect me. I don't think a whole lot of people have babies for money. I think a lot of times it kind of goes the opposite of that. Babies are expensive. They're demanding, delightful little creatures. If people want to believe things like that, that's entirely up to them. I just feel sorry for them, really.
You have given birth before, 5 years ago, when you had your son Grayson. At that time, you were living as a woman. Give us some insight in what the difference for you was, giving birth as a woman and giving birth, transitioning to be a man.
Right, yeah. I think that there's a lot of really interesting ideas wrapped up in that. That's why I'm writing a book about it right now. I think that the biggest thing to address is that whole living as a woman, living as a man thing, right? Because I've always identified the way that I've identified. There was never a time that I was living as a woman. I was presenting that way, and that's what people assumed. But they were very different experiences for sure. Nothing about my first pregnancy felt hopeful or within my control. My body didn't look anything like it wanted to. I wanted it to. I was still wrestling with the fact that that was my reality. I hadn't told anybody. I didn't know if I ever would. I was so depressed. I didn't know if I was so depressed I didn't know if I'd be able to bond with the baby once I had them. I was so terrified for what's my life going to look like? What's this baby's life going to look like? The pregnancy itself just, was sort of an oopsie pregnancy. I wasn't trying for it. I didn't mean for that to happen. And the way that I thought about myself and perceived myself was so different. I've changed a lot in the last 5.5 years in the way that I think about what sex means. What does gender identity mean? What is a gender role? How are those things defined? How do they relate to each other, and how do they exist on their own as separate concepts? And so that really changed the way I think about pregnancy and what I think about what it means to have this set of first and secondary sex characteristics or not, and how much gender can you really assign to the body parts someone is born with when we have intersex people, when we have transgender identities, when it's very clear that while most of the time things go together in a predictable way, that's not always the case, and that's not true, and there is all this room for variety and variation.
But did you? You've described being depressed at the time of your last pregnancy when you, as you put it, you were presenting as a woman. Did you think that perhaps the pregnancy might make you more connected to being a woman?
Yeah, I definitely held out that hope for sure, and I've talked about that before, hoping that it would resonate with me and it would make it go away. I don't think anybody elects to be transgender, and I knew that to make my anxiety and my misery go away what that was going to mean, you know, what coming out would entail, which it's crushing, the anxiety of that. When you think about everything that's going to change and everything that you probably will stand to lose. I think a lot of people avoid it and put it off. So yeah, that I was hoping that I would somehow, I guess, be cured of it, if you will. That definitely didn't happen.
As you...
I didn't have that anxiety this time hanging over my head. I wasn't trying to make this pregnancy into something it could never be for me. You know, this time I was trying to make it work around my own expectations, and at least a lot more things were in my control. You know, I chose to have this baby. I wanted to. It was an experience I was emotionally prepared for this time, and I was able to have it looking and feeling the way that I wanted to feel, and I had the support of people perceiving me that way.
Yes.
You know.
And so generally just much more happier in yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I didn't feel like I was committing this horrible act towards, you know, this little person that I'm supposed to be bringing into the world. Like, that's a big thing, to play such a big part in choosing to be that miserable every day because you don't want to deal with the reality of who you are and what that means for your life, you know. And that's a big weight to carry around, especially when it affects somebody so helpless who you're supposed to give everything to and be willing to sacrifice for.
Can I ask then, if you don't believe that pregnancy is an inherently feminine thing?
Right.
You don't?
You're asking me why I think that?
Yeah.
Because how can it be? You know, if there are people with masculine gender identities who are wanting to get pregnant and have babies, and believe me, I'm not the only one. I'm sure in the United States alone, thousands of trans men have babies every year. There's a lot of people online in private social spaces who are having those experiences and sharing them. Then it can't be. And the other thing we have to consider is that gender doesn't have to do with your first or secondary sex characteristics. It has to do with your brain's preconceived notions and expectations about what your body is going to be like. You know, it's the same way where a baby who is born without limbs will still maybe get phantom sensations in their arms and legs, even though they've never had them, because your brain is wired to expect your body to have limbs.
And do you accept, Kaci, that for some people that is really, that might be quite difficult to hear you say that pregnancy is not inherently feminine, because pretty much the whole of modern civilization sees pregnancy as a female thing?
That's true, but you know, we see things in a lot of antiquated terms. We see things in a very binary way, even though there's indisputable scientific evidence that says sex and gender exist on a spectrum. You know, we've got intersex people, we have transgender people. So much goes into the way that someone's body looks and the way that they see themselves, and it's not. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive, and they're not interconnected to the same degree that I think people tend to assume that they are. I think as there's more education and more awareness and more language, you know, that's the other thing too. A lot of people can't separate a gender role from gender identity, and a lot of people can't separate gender identity from sex. So, of course, people aren't going to understand when they're confused and when there's erasure. You know, people have a very limited scope of what it even means to be transgender. And then we have people's religious beliefs on top of that filter what they see and think and feel about it. So naturally, it's going to be complicated. But I think there's been a lot of things over the course of human history that have been complicated and difficult for us to understand. But I have no doubts that eventually everyone will be on the same page.
OK. We've already referred to your 5.5-year-old, Grayson, your little boy. Your new baby, Phoenix, you have decided to bring Phoenix up as gender neutral. And I noticed at the beginning of our conversation, you talked about Phoenix. You didn't use he or she. You said, yeah, they're doing really well, they're bonding, and so on and so forth. Why have you made that decision?
Well, we're not going to raise them throughout their entire childhood that way. It's about personal autonomy, and it's about asking yourself, if we can't, you know, we can't decide what someone's gender identity is going to be and what their preferred pronouns are going to be and how they're going to see themselves based on their genitals. You know, we can make a guess. We'll probably be right. Most of the time we'll probably be right, but enough of the time we'll be wrong that it's probably not a good idea just for that reason. And I just don't think it's something for me to decide for them or share with other people. I think by the time they're, anywhere between 18 months and 4 years old, we'll probably have a really good idea of who they are. And at that time, I think it'd be more appropriate to start using a gendered pronoun. I think that I just don't think it's necessary to identify
sorry to interrupt,
kids.
Kaci. You know there'll be people listening to you speak right now saying, well, you already have a good idea because they've either been born with boys' genitals or girls' genitals. And by allowing gender neutrality, it could be confusing, if not distressing, for your child as they grow up.
Until you hit puberty, what point does that really have anyway? Why are we concerned with whether a child is male or female unless there's some attempts to sexualize them, So I think that
Perhaps because it's just more straightforward and simple for a child, easier to grasp as you're growing up.
Well, I don't think that children have a tendency to really gender themselves a whole lot, and I think I don't think there's going to be any damage done to them because they were able to choose that for themselves, especially being so small. And again, with people saying there's nothing to decide, once again, that's the confusion, between merging gender identity and sex. That's just somebody not understanding that there actually is more at play than just those genitals, right? That's not the only thing that dictates the sense of gender for that person. It has way more to do with what's going on in between their ears and what their brain expects and how they've built their core personality based on that.
And you know all about that because of the struggles you had as you were growing up.
Yeah, exactly. And I do have that benefit of having that lived experience, so perhaps it does make it more relatable for me. But I don't think it's impossible for people to understand. I really don't.
But I do think it's worth explaining, Kaci, how difficult that can be for somebody, because there are still some people who do not understand the depth of anxiety and trauma and potentially self-harm that somebody can experience when they look one way but feel another.
Oh yeah, sure, absolutely. But I don't think that people are incapable of understanding it at the same time. But I can certainly empathize with how confusing that might be, Just like, for me, so it was very difficult for me to understand what white privilege was at first. That was not an easy concept for me to grasp. And honestly, I was bothered by it at first, like, what's this? I don't know. How do I feel about that? But the more I've educated myself about it, the more I understand it. Will I ever understand what it feels like to be a person of color completely? No. No, I will not. But I can educate myself, and I can listen, and I can try to be a good advocate. And I can choose to default to what people of color have to say about their experiences when I'm confused or when I don't understand. And I think that same thing could be applied to someone who doesn't understand gender variation. It's okay that you don't understand it. There's resources out there to educate yourself with. The problem comes when you decide to be transphobic or when you decide to be racist. That's the issue. And if you're brought up thinking it's okay to be racist or that it's even right to be, you're going to be confused. And a lot of people get brought up thinking it's okay to be transphobic, and maybe that's even the right way to be. Yeah, they're going to be confused.
Okay.
People are going to learn at different rates than others, but I do think over time, more and more people will understand, and it will be less confusing because we'll have more social context for it. Right now, people are taking shots in the dark. They don't have a framework to be able to understand it against. That's why you doing this show is important. That's why me writing my book is important and putting the blog out there, because people start to understand more. They have that framework. They have something to put it against, and then at least there's hope for understanding. But right now, there's just not enough out there, I think, for people to understand as much as they want to, but that will change. It will.